Jess Connolly, and you are listening to the Go and Tell Gals podcast. We exist to equip and encourage kingdom women who are using their God-given gifts for the good of others and the glory of God. If you are a mom, a student, an artist, a doctor, we are hoping that this episode will leave you encouraged and ready to run. We're so glad you're here. Let's go. We do have an important update in the Go and Tell Gals office. Hi, this is Jess.
And Anna.
We're here. Today's episode is about community and your calling. And I want you to just go ahead and prepare your hearts that Anna Victorson did buy me a BFF bracelet for Galentine's.
Just felt like it needed to happen.
So I'm off the market.
Which wrist do you wear it on? Do you wear it on your left or your right wrist?
I wear it on my right with my watch.
I'm like, does it need to be on your left? Is there something signifying about like your wedding ring is on your left hand?
If you're wondering how many times I've referenced the bracelet, it's a lot. It's a lot. I think that night when I had dinner with my family and we said the highs of our day, I said, well, my new BFF bracelet was the high of my day. You should also know, like, I'm not discounting it, but it's not like fine jewelry.
No, I bought it for like $6 at Target. Like, I think it's actually a children's bracelet, but it's stretchy. So I have one too, and you have one, and they work.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, it doesn't take a lot for me. Like, it doesn't take a lot. I feel very loved.
It's truly the thought that counts.
I'm riding on a high of that BFF bracelet, but I don't know. Maybe this is your sign that you need to go buy it with somebody. Buy your relationship thirsty friends a small trinket. You know,
throw them a bone. It just might be the one little thing they need that just really gets them through.
We just need affirmation. That's all. Just a little bit of affirmation. No, I'm totally kidding. We're really. I'm not. None of that was kidding. Actually,
that's all very real. But we're just moving on.
We are moving on, and I am saying like, ha ha ha. Okay, we're talking about community and your calling. I'm excited about this episode today. Yeah. We shared a little bit about this at our rally event this past week. It felt like it resonated. It felt like it hit. And I'm ready to dive in. So let's take a quick pause for some coaching. And while I'm doing the coaching session, you can go on Amazon.com and see if you can find some BFF bracelets for your people. Let's go. Hey friends, quick coaching on boundaries and bitterness, especially applicable as we're talking about relationships and calling today. So one thing I've noticed is that bitterness is a really good reminder for me that I probably need a better boundary. This is not going to be true in every single situation. And it's not to say that if you're feeling bitter, it's not because somebody hasn't done something wrong. But I've learned when someone has hurt me, or if someone has just done something, even unknowingly, that has made me feel bitter, I get to pause and ask, is there a better boundary I could set here? For example, a lot of times I might feel bitter if I'm overextending myself serving someone and they don't even notice it. And so I have to pause and ask, does this person even need me to serve them in this way? Did I volunteer for this? Did I present myself and put myself in a situation that maybe they didn't even ask me to be in the first place? Or I have to pause and say, is this a good moment for me to make sure that I have boundaries securing the most sacred parts of my life? Am I still protecting my relationship with God? Am I still protecting my rest? Am I still protecting my physical boundaries that I need? Am I still protecting my core relationships? And a lot of times I find that by the point that I feel bitter, I have lost some important boundaries. So that's a good reminder for all of us that if you start to feel bitter, check your boundaries. Let's keep going.
Hey gals, we have a quick question for you. What would it take to make a lasting change in your life? To finally shift your habits and set goals that matter? In her new book, Reset, licensed counselor Deborah Fileta wants to help you break free from the unhealthy cycles that have left you feeling burnt out and discouraged. Deborah writes, "You're not alone in having something in your life you want to shift. Wanting to change is evidence of humility and strength, of maturity and growth. It tells me that you see weak spots in your life and you want to get better, stronger, and healthier. Reset will walk you through 31 powerful practices that are grounded in psychology and rooted in God's word. Each practical exercise will give you the power to own your thoughts, understand your feelings, and ultimately change your life. No matter how many times you've fallen back into old thought patterns and unhelpful habits, Reset will empower you to make changes that you can be proud of. You can find Reset by Deborah Fileta, linked below in our show notes, on Amazon or from your favorite bookseller. Now, back to our episode.
Okay, at our rally event this last weekend, we called women together. It was a day of in-person coaching. We'll actually be releasing the audio for that event so you guys can hear it if you didn't get to join us. But we talked about 3 big things at Rally, and we were doing coaching in 3 big bucket areas. The first of which is vision, like where are you going with your whole life? The second is goals. How are you incrementally agreeing with the vision God's given you for your life? And the last session we did was on rhythms. How are you daily walking in those things? But right there in the middle of all of that, we decided to put in a session about community and relationships. And the reason why is because I see so many women believing this lie that when we walk in our calling or when we move forward in the vision God's given us for our life, there is the assumption that it will automatically mean isolation for us. It will mean loneliness for us. And I don't know about you, Anna, but I have heard my entire adult life, like leadership is lonely. This is just the way it's going to be. I know, like, I've obviously heard that from like a ministry perspective, but in your time in the business world, did you perceive that as well?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's a lot more, maybe not more necessarily pronounced, but more vocalized in the like vocational ministry field.
Yes.
But I think you can definitely perceive it even like no matter what industry you're in, that like positions of leadership, you're just going to feel, I don't know, a little bit isolated from the other people around you.
Yeah, that's real. So here's really my first follow-up question to this lie is, do you feel like this sounds like God? Do you feel like our Father who loves us and creates us and calls us to use our God-given gifts for his glory and the good of others? Do you feel like he was thinking when he created us, like, and when they do this, I'm going to make sure they're good and lonely? To me, it doesn't sound like God. No. It doesn't sound like God that he would say like, hey, just when you get to the place in your life where you're experiencing a lot of abundance and using your gifts, that's when you're going to really hit rock bottom with your relationships. Yeah. I feel like it's a narrative that we've accepted that is actually really not serving us anymore. So we're going to really just talk about a few helpful ideas that we think help keep community vibrant while you're stepping into your calling. But first, I want to kind of submit this idea of niching down. So we talk a lot about niching down in the business world, specifically in marketing, et cetera. And the idea of niching down in your business is getting really strategic about your strategies and specifically about your customer base, like getting it so fine-tuned that you're able to really like aim and fire in a specific area in your business. But I want to submit the idea of niching down in community. And by that, I mean having a really clear focus about the purpose of your relationships and the needs that you have for community. Because I do believe, right, that in Matthew, we're told that the path to life is a narrow one. So I don't believe that like in every really vibrant and abundant and obedient season in our life, we're going to have a million friends. I don't think that's true. But I also don't accept the lie that it's absolutely going to be lonely. So I think there's some niching down that needs to happen. What do we need? What do we want out of these relationships? And how can we run really well in 2, 3, or 4 or 5 really strong friendships so that we can stay on the path in our calling? I feel like you have like a really healthy niched down life of relationships. Do you?
I don't know. I'd like to hear more about that.
I feel like you're really clear about what you need. Like, for example, let me tell you why I think this. Because a lot of times if people will joke about like not having a ton of friends, like you'll be like, yeah, I don't have a ton of friends either. But you're not joking and you're not sad about it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I also I feel like I'm a pretty like realistic person.
Yeah.
And so I'm not like, I know who my friends are. I know who like the people that are super close to me that I can trust are.
Yeah.
And I think I also know, like, I don't know. I feel like the older you get, the more like your friendships change and evolve.
Yeah.
And I'm not like looking at college Anna anymore, who had like
Right.
a group of 12 gals who would, you know, pile in 3 cars and roll everywhere together. That's just like not life when you're
I can't put
30 and your friends have kids and
you need a seatbelt.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. But I think for a lot of women, what I think comes more instinctive to you is that I think for a lot of women, that's kind of a painful realization.
Painful or almost like an insecurity a little bit.
Yeah. But I don't think you're insecure about it, which I think is beautiful. I think I am insecure about it.
Get her another friendship bracelet, everyone. Just kidding.
Don't. Insecure is not the right word. I think I've had grief around it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've had like this is not for me. And I think I feel it really pronounced in community because, and this, a part of this is just like the nature of being a pastor or a pastor's wife, is that it's really important for you to set the tone of how community will be.
Mm-hmm.
And then a really beautiful, healthy thing happens where that community takes off without you.
Mm.
And you can feel a little bit like a puppy, like watching from outside the window.
Like, wait for me.
Yeah.
What about me?
But it's actually a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of healthy women who are like, I love when it happens without me. And I will say now I love when community happens without me, but that was a process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. And it was a process to remember this wasn't rejection. This wasn't something that was wrong with me. This is actually good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyhow, before we get into our kind of 5 helpful tips, we see 2 kind of pendulum swings that can both get a little bit unhealthy when it comes to really, I think, just Christian women and community in general. And again, like there's truth to like both of these ideas a little bit, but I think that it's really frequent that we take it too far in an unhealthy way in both of these ideas. So the first I call toxic TikTok culture, and I don't have TikTok. So this is just what I hear. But I hear that if you are not careful on TikTok, you can get into like an algorithmic message hole that talks a lot about cutting all the negative people out of your life. I think we saw this even on Instagram a few years ago with the red flag, like red flag, red flag, red flag. If so-and-so does this, red flag. And what I told you privately in our office, that I was like, I feel red flags about so many people calling red flags on everybody else.
Like, it's like physical representation of like the plank in your eye versus the speck in someone else's eye, you know?
Yeah. You want to talk about toxic? Calling everybody else toxic is toxic.
Yeah.
It's not helpful.
We're human. We're all toxic. That's literally the gospel.
And I am not saying that we should continue in relationship with people who are harmful. I am not saying that.
Right.
But that is typically the exception to the rule. The rule is that people are messy and that they sin. Mm-hmm. And you are messy and you sin.
Yeah.
And so I think it can be very toxic to like have this idea that you're only going to have very whole, very healed, even like the way we talk about the Enneagram, like, oh, she's a healthy 8 or he's an unhealthy 6. Like, when did it get so common to like label someone healthy or unhealthy?
Right.
You
That's
know?
so mean.
It's so unkind. It's so unkind. And I've definitely been a part of that in the past. But so I would say one pendulum swing is like, we're calling everybody healthy, everybody toxic, everybody this, everybody that. The far other pendulum swing of this is that we see, and again, I see this in a lot of Christian women, that we see everyone as ministry. Like, well, she's not my friend, but she's my ministry. Or like, we decide that everybody that we're in a relationship with is a little bit beneath us, but it's okay because we're helping them.
Yeah.
This is not good. And what I often say is like, I need you to imagine that if someone asked Jesus about his disciples, those very messy, confused men who sinned all over him, imagine if he was talking about them and he was like, oh, those guys, they're not my friends. They're just my disciples. Like,
I just minister to them.
I'm just here for them.
I'm perfect. They're not. So
yeah, like this
can't be friends.
Right. This is not how Jesus talked. So I think we swing from one end to the other of where we're like, nobody's healthy enough for me. And then we're like, it's okay. Nobody has to be healthy. I'm healthy. And so
I'll be the
somewhere,
health for us all.
right. And what we have to talk about in our office when we hear this kind of like crop up, this idea of like, she's my ministry or they're my ministry, is we say like, it's really important that you understand that for the most part, when you minister to someone, they should consent to it. So if you have a relationship that you are treating as ministry and they don't know it, it's probably going to leave you feeling just a good bit prideful. That being said, how do we do this in between? How do we do this thing where it's like, I'm growing, I'm walking with God, I'm going to sin, I'm going to be messy, I'm going to apologize. I want to be in a relationship with healthy-ish, non-harmful people. Again, I am not advocating for staying in any relationship where you're being verbally, physically, any kind of abused in Jesus' name. So we're talking about like the general public of people. How do we go and grow in relationship together as we say yes to our callings? How do we keep these relationships vibrant? Number one, this I'm stealing straight from Lisa Turkhurst and her book Uninvited and wording it just a little bit differently. But I want us to work on coming in loved, coming into every room, every situation, every hangout, every women's retreat, every moment when we're going to be using our God-given gifts, coming in knowing we're loved by God and like we have something to offer. I think that a lot of times, like our self-talk and our mental talk, just as we're preparing even to enter a place, is that of like, I'm a mess. Nobody else gets this. Like I have all these issues and no one else sees them, instead of reminding ourselves that we're loved and seen and held by God. And also that the way that we love and see other people is actually impactful.
Yeah, that's so good. That reminds me of, you say it, but someone else said it first, but you don't always get what you want, but you always get what you expect.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that because I feel like if you come into a situation expecting to like feel messy or expecting to feel left out or expecting, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like if you come in that way,
Yeah.
like that's,
You're going to find it.
Yeah, you are going to feel that way. But if you come in loved and like by God, by people, you're going to find that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that's how you're going to present yourself.
100%.
And that's how like the community is going to accept you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about assumptions and even like assuming the best in other people, assuming that like they're going to mess up, but like for the most part, they want good for you is a really healthy way to start any day.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2, in relationships, access need and desire, but practice patience. So I think it's actually so healthy to check in on our relationships in our community, especially after we niche down and we've got 2 or 3 people that we're running with. I think it's really important that we access our need and our desire. Hey, what do I need from this relationship? What do I hope for this relationship? What would be fun for me in this relationship? But I also need to practice patience as I wait for that relationship to grow into that naturally. I have a friend who is so kind and she really leads me well in this. And she will literally text me and just say like, hey, I'm just checking in. Like, how's our friendship going? Any way I could be loving you better? And it means so much to me that she's like opening that that line of communication. It makes me obviously want to do the exact same for her. But after we express that, then we have to really be patient with each other to let that take root and to let people grow and change at the rate which is natural. Number 3, as you grow in your relationships and in your calling, be curious about the callings of others, but also be compassionate about their struggles. So what we hear from women all the time in Go and Tell Gals when they're getting coached and they're moving forward and they're saying yes to God is nobody else really gets it. Like nobody really gets my calling. Nobody gets what it is I'm trying to do. Nobody else in my community really understands. We just say like, totally, we get it. And also you probably don't get what your friends do either.
Yeah, for sure.
And because we don't believe one calling is more important than somebody else's, if you are not being curious about your friend who's a barista or your friend who's a nanny or your friend who is a secretary or your friend who is a grad student or your friend who's a stay-at-home mom, if you are not curious about their callings, do not expect them to be curious about yours. But do know that you can start the curiosity. You can say like, hey, tell me more about what your day looks like, or tell me what's hard for you about your calling or about your day or about your job or about your life right now that I might not understand. A lot of times, like when my friends are telling me about their day, I'll try to ask really descriptive questions that even give me a better picture of what their day is like. So sometimes I'll be like, like, what do you eat for lunch? Like,
Yeah.
like when
do you sit down at a table or
Literally.
do you like
right.
go out?
Right.
Do you sit at a desk?
Just because I know that the more curious I am and the better I can picture how they live their day, the more I can just be on their team and be thinking of them and praying for them. And so there is this beautiful principle that in most healthy relationships, if you're curious first, people will be curious back. But then I think the other hand of that is that we have to be really compassionate about struggles that we don't understand.
Yeah.
You and I definitely talk about this, and you've definitely heard me like grieve this a little bit, that it can be really hard for me that if somebody is curious about my calling, or if after I'm vulnerable to say like, I have X, Y, and Z on my plate today, if they dismiss it as if it's no big deal, it's really harmful.
Yeah.
So if somebody's like, oh my gosh, no big deal, you got it. I feel this way a lot about writing. Like if I'm like, I'm kind of behind on writing, I need to write 3,000 words today. And they're like, oh, you got it, no big deal. I'm like, no big deal? Really?
Yeah. It's like they're trying to be like encouraging and like pump you up, but it actually comes off as like dismissing what you're doing.
Exactly. And the same would be true again if you have a friend who works in an office and she's behind on filing and she says like, I'm buried in paperwork. Say like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Or like a friend in grad school or a friend in med school or something who has like a massive test. Like, I don't think anyone would be like, oh, that huge test that like your whole future rides on is no big deal. Like, you're going to let them know like, hey, I'm praying for you. I know that's coming up.
Yeah.
And then you would hope that they're going to treat you the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. So be curious, but also be compassionate. Number 4, expect and embrace seasonal shifts. I think this really just comes down to knowing like what your needs, what your desires, and what your capacity are in the season you're in. And also like communicating that with grace and empathy feels really, really, really helpful. I was in a season in 2019. I've shared this before on the podcast where I was like, I have so much love to give. I'm ready for more friends. Like I have love in my heart. I go to bed at the end of the day thinking like I could encourage probably 10 more people. And I will tell you, I am not in that season anymore. Now I am like, if I have to love one more person, I'm going to die.
I can't answer one more text message. I cannot have one more unread thread on there. I
cannot. That has nothing actually to do with anybody else. That has everything to do with me and what's on my plate right now. What I had on my plate in 2019 versus what I have on my plate right now. To be honest, I'm not blaming them, but it has everything to do with my teenagers. And 4 years ago, my teens did not take a ton relationally from me. Right.
They also were not texting you.
Right. They also weren't texting me. So now I'm like, you think you and your friends text a lot? Wait till you have a teen. They're like, here, hold my beer. I'll keep you texting all day. Not serious. My kids don't drink beer. But you know what I'm saying? Like they can text it up. And so expecting and embracing these seasonal shifts and then communicating them with just kindness to your people. Like, hey, I have more on my plate to give right now. Hey, I have nothing on my plate to give right now. Feels really helpful.
Yeah. And then like, I would just say to like, remember that like that is reciprocated. So same thing as like what I said earlier about the like plank in your eye versus the speck in someone else's. Like just know too, if you're in a season where you can give a lot and you're pouring out to someone and they're not necessarily giving the same level back, you can have not even like have grace for that, because I'm sure there's going to be other seasons that they're going to be the one pouring into you, you know? And so just like knowing that, acknowledging that, and still showing up for them, even if they can't show up for you at the exact same level.
So good. That's really smart. That's really smart. Whew. That's really helpful. All right. Last one that we've started to talk about, this little word equation often amongst our team, that vulnerability plus generosity equals victory. And I'll unpack it for you this way, that I think it's beautiful and important that we be vulnerable, that we, again, not just act like everybody's ministry and everybody's beneath us and we're the wisest at all times. But I think it's also important that we remember our capacity to be generous, to show up and love other people well. But what happens is when you take vulnerability and you only try to be generous, again, you treat everybody as ministry and you kind of act prideful. So I would say generosity without vulnerability often equals pride. And on the flip side, I would say that vulnerability without generosity often turns us into a victim. So if we think that we can only receive, if we can only take, if we're noticing ourselves like only being the one talking or sharing our heart, we've maybe stepped over a line and need to cross back a little bit more into generosity.
Yeah. And you unpack this more at the event. And I think it's even worth noting that like there are seasons where you are not going to have the margin to be generous. Like you could be going through something huge in your life where like you are putting all your energy into that situation and you can only be vulnerable with the people around you. And of course, they are not going to look at you as a victim. They are going to be there for you to lift you up.
Yeah.
But if that is 100% of the time, the narrative that's happening,
100%.
that's when it becomes the victim. Yeah.
And oftentimes I'll have friends going through a crisis and like, well, maybe we'll be meeting to like just check in on them. And at the end of that, they'll say like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry I talked the whole time. How are you? And I'm like, oh no, girl,
don't worry about it.
Don't worry. We're good.
This is about you right now.
Yes,
like,
exactly. Like, don't worry. At my next crisis, I will talk the whole time. It'll be fine. Yeah. We're okay. You know? So absolutely. There's seasons of crisis. This is like, if you're noticing this ongoing for months or for years, or, you know, it's just a rhythm in a particular relationship, because what's interesting is that we get in like interesting holds in particular relationships. Yeah. So, hey, here's the deal for you today. Can I just encourage you to send this podcast to a friend? Like, we would love to be a resource for you to just start a conversation. And if you're like, oh, I wouldn't ever know how to bring up my needs or desires in a relationship, or like, oh, maybe I am struggling a little bit more with being too generous and not vulnerable, or the opposite. We do this so that you can start conversations with your actual community. So take a screenshot of this podcast, text it to a friend and say like, hey, they told me to send this to you. Let's talk about it and talk about things we noticed or paid attention to or totally didn't agree with. That's fine too.
Whatever gets the conversation going.
Absolutely.
Send them a friendship bracelet with it if you want.
Jesus'
you
name,
know,
I would. Come on, let's do it. We love you. Go and tell gals. It's our honor to be on your team. God is mighty in you and in your relationships.
And your calling.
Amen. Let's go. Thanks for joining us for today's podcast episode. If you have a minute, we would be so blessed if you would take a minute to leave a review wherever you've listened to this podcast. You're also welcome and encouraged to share this on Instagram, Facebook, wherever you use social media. We'd also love to hear from you. DM us on Instagram or send us a message on Facebook, shoot us an email. We love to connect with you to hear how we can encourage you and further equip you. God is mighty in you. Let's keep going.